Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Sharma. I'm the co-chair of Westminster City Council Rainbow Network. It's really exciting to have all of you here today. We have a mixture of Westminster City Council staff, students and local residents, which is really fantastic. And of course our champion here, Councillor Lily. So today we're going to look at our LGBT history and understand about some of the identities of different people who live and work in Westminster. I'm going to start with Juliet. Hi Juliet. I'd like to ask you a little bit about how you describe yourself. How would you describe your identity?
I would probably describe myself as bi and someone who, I guess, asexual stroke aromantic as well. Both of those kind of, I would say, describe a sexuality that is changing and sometimes there, sometimes not there. And sometimes present and sometimes not present. So I feel like I get a lot of that. But I'm a university student and I've worked in Westminster for a little while. So yeah.
Thank you. Andre, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Andre, how would you describe your identity?
It's a tricky question. I would say I describe my identity by the intersections in which it sits. My heritage is British, American, and my kind of ethnicity is Afro-Caribbean and Welsh, and grew up in quite a conservative Christian home and, kind of gay, pan, queer person. So within that, there's just a bunch of intersections, and I feel like I kind of sit at the middle of that, and it's been a huge part of how I've kind of formed and shaped my identity.
Nilton, welcome.
Hi, Anne.
How would you describe your identity, Nilton?
I would describe I think I've got a complicated relationship with my identity. I think I'm still sort of discovering who I am as a person. I kind of don't know, kind of do know, but it doesn't matter. I'd say I find this interesting because there's like certainly a generational difference in how people identify themselves. And I'd say personally for me, I like using the word queer to identify myself, but I know that a lot of older queer people find that word quite difficult, mainly because of the associations that the word had previously. And I, in my view, use that word as a way of empowerment and reclaiming a word that once meant something, that once was used against us feels empowering, and I don't want to play a role of being a specific gender or sexuality. So queer is certainly the right way for me. So yeah.
My name is Patrick Lilly. I'm Councillor for West End, which includes Soho. I'm the LGBT champion, and I've lived, loved, danced, everything you can do in Soho I've probably already done since I arrived, wandering down Wardour Street at a very early age of 17 and discovered gigs, clubs and all that sort of stuff. I've been running club nights since about since mid-80s, but the first kind of queer club night was called Queer Nation in 1990, and it did cause a few ruffled feathers with different people, but it ran for 20 years, and we would have issues of people not wanting to put the poster up in the gym or whatever, but it was hopefully a welcoming space, and I still put on club nights in central London. Luckily, the current one I'm doing is in Camden.
Jake, do you want to tell me a little bit about your identity and Westminster?
Hi, Sharma. So I describe my identity as very simply a gay man, but I'm also a gay man who's neurodivergent, Irish, Caribbean, going deaf in one ear. I feel like I tick all the boxes, quite frankly. But I think the most challenging part of all of those different labels was coming out, I think, and not so much coming out to friends and family, because when I did come out, I knew who loved me, and they're still in my life, and they're just fantastic people. But coming out to myself was tough. The shame of it all, and I still have that. And I remember reading something about before you come out, you build this armour, and then you come out and you spend the rest of your life trying to remove it. And I think I'm in that space. Still 20 years after coming out, actually. But my relationship with Westminster is where that armour came off.
Peter, how is it for you as a resident of Westminster?
I've lived here such a long time now. I take a lot of things for granted. I'm quite a private person. I like listening to discuss. I've been all over the place, all over Westminster. I've been to Heaven. I've been back. I've been to all sorts of places. I've been to the Garrick Club. I've done so many things, but I don't talk too much about my sexuality or what I do. I'm very accepting of everything. Westminster's I've just taken it maybe for granted. And I don't mean that in a horrible way. It's just because of the way, I did my first West End show in the late 60s. So I come from it from a totally different perspective. I understand education much more than I was in the 60s, because I was young, and I didn't, half the time, like when we were all young, as all the experiences I've had, we don't even know what we were doing. You just flew by your pants or whatever it is. And I find Westminster all right. They've been cool to me.
How about you, Chris?
Well, I was born in South America, in British Guyana, Catholic upbringing, but I've lived most of my life in London, and I was always getting up to Westminster. So, I mean, in the 70s, the best nightclubs were Heaven, places like that, best music, etc. And I was never out, I was never in, because I didn't think about these things. It's like, I was Chris Smith, and I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it's really, I remember at school, secondary school, the BBC came and they said, are you looking for your identity? And I said, no, I know my identity. I know everything about me. And I actually wish I had actually gone on that programme at that time to talk about it, because I thought everyone knew their identity. I thought it was a really strange question.
Thank you. That's so interesting. I've always identified myself as she, her, and a lesbian, and I guess I'm of that generation where, queer did feel like something that was wrong, but now I think it's actually a really inclusive term that brings a lot of people together. So I can really see the value in queer. What do other people? What do you feel about that term?
I've definitely seen it reclaimed in a lot of different contexts. At my university, I'm secretary of the LGBT Society, and one of the things that was kind of interesting is that LGBT students are being included more and more in their specific spaces, but also I feel like there's a sort of difference, and there's oftentimes intersections that are underappreciated, as you were saying. So you have this sort of picture where, although kind of the middle class British gay man from the home counties might be included in the university, you have other students who kind of don't fit that mold being having to find their own identity in a different way and having to come to us for kind of support. And so a lot of times I feel like, as someone who grew up in kind of a very sort of, I want to say, conservative background and had conservative parents, I feel like quirky and queer, those two words, there's something about the letter Q perhaps that it makes you think about difference, and it makes you think, oh, well, you're unique and your identity deserves to be celebrated. So I definitely see that like as an empowering thing and not kind of a derogatory thing.
My own journey hasn't been linear, and I thought it would be. I thought when I came out and kind of came out as a gay man, that would be the end of it, and I would, I've found myself, and did that relative to some younger people kind of later in my life. I was almost 25, and what's been really interesting is that all that really did was that was the first step, and through that step, I've then now had the freedom to challenge and kind of push back on all of the kind of structures and identities that have been assigned to me by someone else. And through that process of kind of, given myself the freedom to explore and be comfortable in, in a queer identity. And what I really love about the way that queer is being socialized is that I feel that it's being socialized centering around communities that have often been excluded from gay spaces, and recognizing kind of my own privileges as someone who kind of is cis-presenting and light-skinned. What I love about queer spaces is that they're often not focusing on that. They're not focusing on kind of masculine presenting people. That generally often focusing on femme and non-binary people, on people from the global majority, and people who have often been excluded from the conversation around LGBTQ topics. And so I think it's been a slow process for me and for that term, but I'm really excited to see kind of where we go from here.
I was going to say, I think there's sort of also, it's quite important to be understanding that this word is quite heavy for different generations. And I think perhaps considering that and creating safe spaces for our community to talk about these issues instead of sort of shutting the door and not listening to other people's experiences. Because, although we live in a society where people are becoming more accepting of queer identity, I know that my experience would have been very different to people who grew up during the AIDS pandemic and in the 80s, where gay people were sort of scapegoated and vilified. So, yeah.
I would say that I think age, maybe for me as someone in my late 40s, I have been out for a very long time now, and I have a civil partner and I have children. So, I've had quite a lot of experiences that mean that I've had to explore different bits of my identity. So, for example, I guess as a lesbian having children, the assumption was that I would go part-time at work after I had my children, but I'm the kind of higher earner, and my partner and I split the maternity leave 50-50 because that's what we wanted to do. But a lot of those gendered assumptions, then you have to rethink and decide how you want to live your life.
We have a secret plan to re-gay Soho, okay? Because it's been in a state of flux for hundreds of years, with different communities coming in, and you can see that from the churches and in the bricks and mortar, as you say. I think there's the proliferation of rainbow flags in Soho provides an element, a layer of security and visibility. I mean, they're almost everywhere. The straightest bar ever will still stick up a rainbow flag. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's great that they want to celebrate diversity. But it is, underneath the surface, we know it's not as diverse, really, and it's by seeking out places outside of that. But I think when there's a kind of gay brain drain or something, where people come into London from all over the world. Originally London would be full of Irish and Scotch and Welsh running away from small town, as depicted in that TV programme It's a Sin, where these kids are coming to London and in the 80s and partying hard, and the lives and loves and traumas that followed. Now London is, when you speak to people who are not from London, I know I've met people through the network, that they've come from Estonia, or they've come from Brazil, or they've come from wherever that small town was. And then they find Soho, or they've heard about it, they've heard about our pride.
How did you move to Soho, Patrick?
Sorry?
How did you find Soho? Did you
I
move
was coming
into-
down for a university interview at some university somewhere that probably didn't want me, and I walked up Walker's Court, which is the sex shop bit, and I was like, something's going on here, and I don't really know what it is, and I thought, this is really, there's something here for me, but I don't know what it was after dark, and it wasn't long before, as I said, I've lived, loved. I mean, I've got one naughty story which I'm going to share with everybody, which was that night, Billy's Bowie night. After 3 weeks later, someone wanted me to stay over at the club, pulled the curtain, lovely double bed. They were all set up for it. And I spent the night with this gentleman, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, that this was the most glamorous thing in the world. And it was sexy. And I woke up in a nightclub as opposed to go to the club. And I passed down Mead Street regularly, yeah? And there were other things there. There was a club called the Language Lab, the first rap club in London, from what I remember. Experimental rap at the very, very cutting-edge early days. And you'd see people, and there was only one night bus. One night bus in London, no tubes, nothing after that, one night bus. It went to Heathrow from Piccadilly Circus.
Of all
Yep,
places.
for the airport, yeah. And the things you saw and heard on the night bus, well, I just thought, I'm in the sleaziest place ever. I heard everything going on. I was like looking out the window at the front, so I'm not going to look back and see what's going on that back seat. Oh. So, this is, Tuesday night, no one else was in Soho. No one, except people up to no good or having fun and stuff. So I had a very exciting introduction to Soho. So for me, it's a dream come true. I didn't want to represent any other area in London. Maida Vale. I'm sorry, Maida Vale. You're not very interesting, or other places, which I won't mention. But the West End has Mayfair. It's got Fitzrovia, where I lived in the squat when I was 20 with Boy George and a bunch of drag queens and other naughty people, and just thought this is the most exciting city on earth, and it still is, and I want it to remain that way, very much so. And people live in these places, cheek by jowl with bars and clubs and all sorts. And we have a sexual health clinic in Soho that has 130 staff. I went and got showed around. I didn't know, I thought it had 10 people. 130 people. Yeah, I just didn't know. I went there 10 years ago and there was like 10 people there, and half of those were customers. And now you go in and it looks like a cafe, and it's like you don't feel like you're a bad person for going to look after your sexual health. They focus on wellness. We've also got parish school.
But isn't that to do with education as well? A little bit. And also there's a huge population explosion in London as well, because I know what you're saying, because I'm old, and I remember certain things like going, and there weren't many people, but we weren't educated.
Well, I think
certainly when I was in the 60s, late 60s, when I went into hair and all of that, that was still taboo in all those places, even being in the West End doing a show. They just didn't exist so much. But I think probably if you're talking about the 80s and 90s, there's an explosion. The more people were coming in and more people didn't care. They were sort of just saying, this is how it is. I must go to see someone. I must do it.
I think there are a couple of different things. I think our communities responded very well to adversity.
Yeah. Yes.
And the catastrophe of 1980 to 1984,
yes.
where, I just get goose pimples thinking about it, But our betters and elders rose to the challenge.
Yeah, I think, which is brilliant.
I had no idea when I came to London. I live in Buckinghamshire, and jumping on the train on my own, thinking, it was 2003 actually, because it was the Rugby World Cup. And I told myself, I want to come up and see the Rugby World Cup at a pub. It's like, even kidding myself, it's like, no, I'm coming up to go to Soho. That sort of just talking to myself and my own inner monologue was almost kind of like trying to come out. And I ended up just walking along Old Compton Street and just not knowing any of the bars and the pubs and the clientele or anything like that, and just going into Compton's. And again, it was just sort of like go and grab a drink and just sort of sit there meekly and then you just talk to people. And these people were just like, you know, they probably just saw me thinking, this guy's new. In every way, shape and form, you know, and they would come up and talk to me, and I remember one guy was calling me she and everything, and I thought, this is fantastic. And then just following them around Soho and having too much to drink and going to heaven and jumping on one of these not so popular rickshaws and going through, and it was absolutely fantastic. It was full of wind in the hair, you know, I just felt this whole kind of cliche of just like, I came out that day and it felt so fantastically releasing, actually. And it's from there then that I started coming out to friends, and I came out to them and like, we know. And that's, you know, and then you're kind of that disappointment, it's like, you know, so was it me that didn't know all this time? And then slowly sort of coming out to I came out to my mum, so my mum's Irish, and coming out to her, and I remember telling her actually, it was in a restaurant, I don't know why, I sort of did in public space, and they're just hugging me. And that feeling of my mother, and then it took me a little bit longer to come out to my dad's. My dad's from a very traditional Seventh-day Adventist, you know, gay's not good kind of family. But he was fantastic, actually. When I eventually came out to him, that was all me. But when I did come out to him and he'd told his family, and I will never forget this, and it kind of gave me the shame back, actually, them telling me he's going to hell. And that is painful, actually, because you always feel like you're never worth it, you know. So coming to an organisation and working at Westminster and working at a place that is the focal point for gay liberation and just people being themselves, gay, straight, punk, whatever, is incredibly important. And when we walked with pride, with work and my family, and my husband wasn't there actually, because he was arranging his own pride a bit further back in for where he works. It felt me, it wasn't just pride, it was acceptance. It was just finally, I feel like home in a way, personally home. But yeah, it has been a journey, and I think it continues to be a journey for me. I don't have the big kind of, I came out with a bang kind of story. I came out meekly, apologetically, and shamefully, actually, and it's taken me a long time to get to this space. So having this conversation with everyone's different experiences at whatever age that they're at, whatever, you know, background they've got, is so incredibly important, actually. And yeah, that's my experience. And yeah, it continues. But now I'm a happily married man. I've been married for 6 years. I'd like to think my husband is happy as well. I think he has to put up, not so much with the gay part of me, he has to put up with the neurodivergent part of me. That's the bit I have to tackle. You know, I'm going to be sat here and fidget all the way through this conversation. But yeah, it's been a journey, actually, and I think what I've come to realise is, and as I said right at the beginning, is the people around me are just the most important people, and I'm lucky to have them, and they've supported me all the way through this self-discovery, I suppose, actually. So that's me, and that's my first time in Westminster was, you know, yeah, that was a good night.
And do you think coming to Westminster as an employee, how did that feel given sort of your relationship with the place, Westminster?
Yeah, I just feel really proud to work here, knowing of its history and knowing how it's really changed as well with the Rainbow Network, and how it is really, you know, we're really starting to make ourselves known and be seen and give that profile. And we've talked about this actually quite a lot, about who are we as a network, because we can be the biggest, brashest, most colourful network, but also we need to be the smallest, most personal, most almost private network as well, because people are at their different stages of their journey. And the big thing that I want to take in my experience is to really say to those people who want to join the network, who just can't for whatever reason, is to welcome them in whatever way they want to be welcome. And just by us being here and talking about this gives all of those people who just can't come out for whatever reason hope that we are going in the right direction. And one of the things one of the experiences I had when I first started working, and I'd come out at home but not at work, and I had this one really good friend at this place, and I said to her, I'm just living this double life, it's this game of chess that you're constantly playing about how do people speak to me, how do I respond to that? If I respond in that way, does it give this impression? You have to always check yourself. And I said to her, I can't do this anymore. I want to be out. And she said to me, don't come out at work. Not because of her, obviously she was a very trusted friend, but she knew how the place would have treated me. So she did it for my own protection. So to be able to talk here, go on Pride, talk openly about my husband, is just another world for me. And I'm only in my early 40s. I'm not, it's not like I've had this whole entire history of what some people have gone through. My journey has been just deeply personal, and just going through that, just shame, I suppose, of just going, actually, I've got nothing to be ashamed of, And now I'm it's taken me a while, but I'm in that place, and I'm incredibly proud to be at Westminster.
I think for a while I found it really difficult exploring my identity. I think, like a lot of queer people, I realized early on that if I focused on my schooling, if I focused on my extracurriculars and kind of other things, that would be a way that people would give me affirmation and acceptance that would kind of give me a scapegoat for then not pursuing romantic relationships. And so for the first 24 years of my life was, I guess, in practice, probably just aromantic. I wasn't thinking or pursuing or feeling anything towards anyone else, and really just focusing on school, focusing on sport, focusing on, extracurriculars, and found those as an escape. But I think through that process then, slowly lost a bit of myself. So I have to remind myself constantly, I'm 30 now and I've been out for about 5 years and just over that, and have to remind myself that I'm actually, as me, as a queer person, I'm only 5 years old. So I've got a lot to explore. I've got a lot to unpack. I've got a lot to learn. A lot of language, understanding of who I really am, and thankfully through the support of therapy and having good community around me, and a lot of the resources that we have available now, have been able to slowly kind of reshape and reform my experience. At the same time, I'm really grateful for those first 25 years, because there's so much learning in there that has kind of now defined and shaped who I am today, and being able to see, even just in my own family, the challenge of me coming out and going through that process, and kind of the pain of being cut off from parents, and we've kind of reconciled that now. But it's also amazing to then see last year at Christmas, my niece came out, and she's 11 years old. And she told her mom she's bi, and her mom came to me right away and was like, "What do we do?" And I was like, and I said nothing. We just see her where she's at, and say great, and that we love her, and just let her explore what, you know, and maybe that will evolve and it will develop and grow into something else, or, you know, it doesn't matter, I think. But what's beautiful is that she has that space to be able to do that, and that was one of those little moments where I'm like, okay, all of the hard work of finding and exploring your queer identity can be worth it.
I worked for Lambeth Council for 17 years, nearly 18 years, and we did some really great work, particularly when HIV and AIDS first reared its ugly head, and the negative publicity that the gay community got. It was mainly the male gay community, not anyone else. But we did some great work in educating not just the gay community, but everybody else as well, and what was needed to. And when I was asked, oh, would you come and work for Westminster? I said, no, I'm doing some great stuff in Lambeth, don't need to come and work for Westminster. You're rich, it's a rich borough, you know. And I was asked a few times, and then said, well, just come and have a look. And I came and had a look, and I thought, okay. And in a way, I love Westminster, really fantastic, doing some great work here. But in a way, I lost that thing of going up to the West End and going out in the West End. I thought when I came here, you know, I was going to go to every gallery every lunchtime, and go into the Tate Gallery and the National Gallery, and then afterwards, you know, after work, you know, go to all the clubs that I frequented, but didn't. But we were still putting on bands, worked with, you know, bands like Imagination, Haircut 100, Boy George, and we would do promotion and record plugging, and we would do a lot of other interesting things. And there was parties, and the parties would always start at, I mean, any of the clubs in the West End, really, not necessarily Soho, but any of the clubs. And then, you know, we would go off. But Westminster has had a big part of my life. I've always lived in Wandsworth, apart from university, but I've always clubbed in Westminster because it's such a great place.
There was a great club. You were just, because when After Heaven, again in the 70s, and no, actually you might know this. Did you remember a club called Montbury's?
Yes.
In Jermyn Street.
Yeah.
Now, that's where I was. That's where I grew up. Yeah. I have to say, and that was one of the most extraordinary. It was a tiny place, and I played there with my band in the early days, and. The artists that came down there, Rudolf Nureyev, ballet dancers, opera singers, Rod Stewart, Elton John, Freddie Mercury, Queen. I mean, a whole heap of people, David Bowie, Nina Simone, because I was recording that in the 70s in Montreux, and she was living in Montreux, and I mean, she came up, and I was sitting with my friend Freddie Mercury, and one of her aides came over to me. It's a very tiny place, like we're all sitting here together, and she just said, would it be all right if I came to meet her and sit with her? And I said, what, of course, Nina Simone, goddess, you know. And I went and sat with her, but it's a whole other story. But those are little clubs that had, and all the luminaries, all the people that we know about, the Rolling Stones used to be down there. I mean, Charlie Watts. I mean, it was a mishmash of a great a sexual orgy of just not music and all sorts of people. And that's where I grew up.
So Peter and Chris, hearing about all these glamorous people that you used to hang out with, and it really excites me because I remember all those people, and then they came out later and I was like, oh, I didn't know that they were queer, I didn't know about this one, I didn't know about that one. And they were all kind of meeting kind of secretly all this time, and they all knew each other. And Julia, as a younger person, how would you reflect on that? Do you have sort of particular musicians that you're aware of, or do you have... is that your experience of Westminster as a place, sort of being a secretive place of nightclubs?
I would say more broadly than that, yes, I have found a lot of my identity, and I have found ways to be comfortable with myself through music. I mean, one of the artists, musicians that I like the most is Cavetown, which incidentally, although I went to their concert in Manchester last weekend, I discovered in Westminster, just listening to it late at night on the bus with somebody. And for context, an indie artist who who is not like necessarily out at work, but is very much a figure for LGBT inclusion and has been ever since they started from Oxford originally. So there is that. I think as well, fitting more broadly into Westminster, I think it is a place where you can feel at home, but you can also feel like you don't really need to box yourself into an identity. Like my partner is non-binary, and I at least in Westminster, when I first took them here to London, probably about a year ago for a job thing that I had to do, I felt just comfortable, you know, holding their hand and walking down. I mean, it was like 2 p.m. or whatever, and going, having a cup of tea, and like just doing all of the normal things without having to sort of put a label on it. Oh, you're a lesbian or you're bi or whatever. And it was just sort of that freedom to go and, you know, love who I love and have the relationship that I want to have without kind of assigning it anything. So for me, that's one part of Westminster. Another part, I think, is this sort of ability to shout. I think Westminster is a very important gateway to the UK for so many people. We talked about kind of how people travel, how, you know, it's a sin, people traveled from the small towns on the railway lines to London and to Soho and to places like that for to go out. And in many ways, people still do that over longer distances today. But I also think it is, in many ways, for me, Westminster, I found my identity a lot through pride and through protests. I think I traveled down here most recently for a protest against the conversion therapy ban that excluded conversion therapy based on gender identity, so trying to include protections for transgender individuals in any conversion therapy ban we had. And standing in Whitehall and sort of holding up signs with some of my friends who are trans and my partner who is, was a really liberating and impactful and powerful moment. I mean, I was there with Nilton. I think you were also there at the protest. And just shouting in front of the world, because it is very much the world stage, is a really cool moment, and I think something that the Gay Liberation Front had 50 years ago, walking down Oxford Street, that we still like continue to appreciate and savor, because part of being queer, as I think was discussed earlier, it is political, and so having that is like, it's really important to have that as well. So.
I suppose when I was young, I've been about 3 marches, but they were for different things. I did again, it's a different time. I did CND marches. That was the hair time and things down Park Lane and the anti-war one, the Iraq War, which was just and so I've done a few of those shouty things. I've never done. I did. There was a little conference for Is It Clause 28 when it was first came out, and I think we did that at the Whitehall Theatre. That's, I think, with Ian McKellen and a few other people like that, and we just did that. But that's quite quiet. They were quite quiet little things. So I'm not that shouty, but I can be.
Mm. How about you, Chris? You're in the union. You surely shout quite a lot.
Well, I absolutely have always loved marches. And for me, it's really important. If you do a march, you do it where you're going to get the BBC, the ITV, etc. So people say, "Oh, well, why are you doing it there?" I'm saying, because like the BBC won't go to Battersea. It's really important that we do things in the places that we're going to get the publicity, so we can actually say why we're doing that march. It's not just about doing it. But you know, my whole life, I think I've said before, is about activism. And I didn't know that, actually. I didn't know I was an activist. It's just, that's what I do. That's what I did. And I think it's really great to hear young people, you know, like yourself, are now taking that mantle.
Nilton, which stages do you shout on?
Well, I mean, for a bit of context about me, I actually came to Westminster when I was very young. I was born in Portugal, and I was lucky enough to, at the time when rent was slightly more affordable, live in Marylebone, and then my mum kind of, my mum didn't have the sort of financial, she wasn't in the financial position to basically afford to live in Marylebone, and thankfully Westminster City Council stood up and provided my mum a home. to take care of her kid and to make sure that we could have a decent life. And I mean, the one thing that I find great about Westminster really is the fact that you step out your door and you can make some noise and people will listen because politicians have to come to work here. So there's that. I mean, unfortunately, it's a shame that the Westminster bubble means that everyone that lives outside of Westminster, their lives experiences are often ignored.
Kind of discovering myself was really tied to the physical space of Westminster, to the physical space of Soho and the brick and mortar, because it gave me the opportunity to tap into a history that I never otherwise would have known. And now working for Westminster City Council, being able to play my small part in preserving and fostering that history for future generations, I think it's just a huge privilege and an honor, and I'm really excited to do my small part in that, and maybe make it better for someone else. Maybe what you referred to earlier, Patrick, of kind of reclaiming Soho and expanding that. And really making it something better for the next generation, because we've kind of put ourselves in a tricky situation where we've made it better for future generations, and now we have to really put some weight behind that, because they're coming out, they're doing it younger, and they're experiencing this world, and I ask myself, have we prepared the world for them, and what are we handing over to them? Because that I'm starting to feel some of the weight of that responsibility of, working here in the City Council. What am I doing with that, and what's the legacy that I'm leaving behind?
It's very simplistic, but if we could learn as a world to live and let live, it is the most, because that means you'll listen to other people and you'll respect. You might not agree. We don't have to agree. Otherwise, we wouldn't have discussions. We wouldn't talk. I don't have to agree with you, but we just have to say, listen, live and let live, and agree to disagree, and just try and, as Milton says, I did that show, Peace and Love. Love. I mean, whatever it means to any of us, but there is a thing of it, and I actually believe that, and I still do.
I think all of us are doing our little bit, and if you're a person who's not so sure about themselves, or a young person, or possibly you're 65 and you've not kind of expressed your true self, take a walk up to the West and have a wander around, say hello to somebody, yeah? Or go to East London, or if you're a very young person, go online and find somewhere safe to go to, or join some of the youth groups that have been knocking around, like Mosaic and others. So just make an effort to be true to yourself, and maybe step out that front door. That's what coming out is going out. Yes. And if you find that you've got friends, if you bump into people, I had a kid come up to me outside Poetry LGBT night a couple of months ago, going to Patrick, I met all my friends' networks at your parties. And he's 27, he's handsome, he's gorgeous, everything. I'm like, just take me home now. But no, people make friends, and I didn't expect to make friends in politics either, and I have. I really didn't go into it for that. And so try and make some friends with people who will accept you. Get out the front door, don't stay at home. There's no point staying at home alone in your room. Get out there, and whether it's theatrical things or arty things, there are places, especially in Westminster, where you will be welcome, whether it's the Tate Modern or Heaven nightclub or the new chocolate coffee bar place in wherever. Just get out the house and say hello to people, whether they're straight or gay, doesn't matter, whatever background. So there you go, do your best.
Thanks so much. I think it's been a fantastic conversation. It's been so good to hear everyone's different thoughts, and I just think, for me, coming out at your age and in Westminster and going to youth groups, how important those groups were, coming to Soho, how important that space is, and then you know, the staff network continuing to provide a space for people when they need it. And, you know, I look forward to continuing and, you know, hopefully marching together at Pride later on in the year.
We will be marching together at Pride. It should be fantastic. If we can get a float, even better.
And I'm really hoping that Peter's going to be singing on the float. You know, there's more space around the float.